Look at your hands. Look at the complex civilization around you. We tell ourselves a comforting story that humanity is the result of a slow, natural accident, a gradual climb from the swamp to the stars over millions of years. But there is a flaw in that narrative, a gap in the timeline that biology struggles to explain. How did human beings evolve so violently fast compared to every other species on this planet? Why did we suddenly wake up with the capacity for math, architecture, and writing while our cousins remained in the trees? The answer may not lie in the dirt beneath our feet, but in the dark void above our heads. Ancient texts, older than the Bible and carved into the bedrock of history, suggest that we are not a product of evolution, but a product of design. We are not just animals. We are the legacy of the Anunnaki. To understand the truth, we must travel back to the very cradle of human history, long before Rome or Greece, to the dust of Mesopotamia, around 4,500 BC. This was the realm of the Sumerians, the first true organized civilization, who seemingly appeared out of nowhere with advanced knowledge that should not have existed for thousands of years. For centuries, their secrets lay buried under the Iraqi sands, until 1849, when archaeologists unearthed a library of 14 clay tablets. These were not mere receipts or laws. They were a history of the solar system. The translation of these cuneiform scripts revealed a terrifying and fantastic story, speaking of a rogue planet called Nibiru that stalks the outer edges of our solar system, completing a vast elliptical orbit once every 3,600 years. But Nibiru was not a dead rock, it was a dying home. The texts describe a civilization of beings known as the Anunnaki, who were facing an existential crisis. The atmosphere of their planet was decaying rapidly, bleeding their world of heat and air, making food production impossible and survival unlikely. Their scientists and alchemists determined that only one substance could repair their shattered sky: gold. They needed gold not for jewelry or wealth, but for its atomic properties, to suspend it in their atmosphere and shield them from cosmic radiation. But Nibiru was barren of this metal, and so, with their world gasping for breath, they looked across the dark ocean of space and saw a blue jewel shimmering in the distance. They arrived on Earth 445,000 years ago, eons before the first human civilization would rise. These were the first astronauts, the first colonizers to cross the abyss, landing their ships on a planet teeming with wild mammoths, saber-toothed tigers, and primitive apes. They established their base in Mesopotamia, building a city of splendor called Eridu. They terraformed a section of this wild planet into a lush, controlled environment, filled with fruit trees and tame animals, a place the ancient texts called Eden. But the Anunnaki did not come here to garden, they came to dig. They established massive underground mines to extract the gold their home planet so desperately needed. To do this backbreaking work, they brought with them a slave race from the stars called the Igigi. For years, the Igigi toiled in the darkness of the earth, suffering humiliation and forced labor, until the breaking point was reached. The Igigi rebelled. They burned their tools and rose up against their masters, igniting the first war this planet had ever seen. The Anunnaki, possessing superior weaponry, decimated the Igigi, crushing the revolt. But they were left with a problem. The gold was still needed, but the workers were dead. Faced with a labor shortage, the Anunnaki turned to genetic engineering. They looked at the primitive hominids wandering the plains of Africa and decided to splice their own advanced alien genes with the DNA of these earthly ancestors. The goal was to create a hybrid, a being intelligent enough to take orders and use tools, but submissive enough to remain a slave. The process was not without its horrors. The texts imply that the first experiments were biological nightmares, creating beings like the Nephilim, giants of immense strength, but devoid of intelligence or self-control. Finally, they perfected the formula. The first successful prototype was named Adamu. This was the first man. We were not born, we were manufactured. These new humans were tall, strong, and capable of speech, designed to maintain the plantations and build the stone houses of their gods. The Anunnaki grew fond of their creation, allowing them to walk in the sacred Garden of Eden and live among the shining cities. But there was a strict condition: do not reproduce uncontrollably. Yet biology is difficult to contain. Humanity began to multiply rapidly, causing overpopulation and noise that irritated the gods. As punishment, and to control the numbers, man was expelled from the paradise of Eridu and forced to survive in the wild lands of exile. Millennia passed, and the clock of the cosmos kept ticking. The orbit of Nibiru brought the massive planet back toward the center of the solar system. The gravitational field of the approaching giant was so immense that it began to tear at the Earth's natural balance. The temperatures spiked, the polar glaciers shattered and melted, and the oceans began to rise. The Anunnaki knew the cataclysm was coming, a great flood that would wash the slate clean. The city of Eridu was doomed to be swallowed by the waves. In a final act of mercy, or perhaps to preserve their workforce for the future, they instructed a chosen few to build large boats, or perhaps suborbital ships, as the texts are ambiguous, that hovered or floated above the rising waters until the levels normalized. As the Anunnaki prepared to abandon their earthly colonies and return to Nibiru, they left behind the seeds of civilization. They taught the survivors the secrets of architecture, mathematics, music, and the stars. They established the concept of monarchy, designating certain human bloodlines as rulers who would keep the Anunnaki heritage pure. Before they vanished into the sky, they ordered the construction of the ziggurats, temples aligned with the constellations, serving as landing beacons to guide them when they one day return to reclaim their property. The hierarchy they left behind formed the basis of all human religion. At the top was Anu, the personification of heaven and the king of the gods, a figure of infinite wisdom who held court over the stars. His children were the titans of legend. There was Enlil, the lord of the air and storms, a strict disciplinarian responsible for keeping the separation between heaven and earth. There was Enki, the scientist and lord of the waters, the patron of Eridu, who had crafted humanity in his labs, and whose influence spread to the Canaanites and Hittites. They left us Nana, the god of the moon, who taught us science, and Utu, the sun god, who rode a chariot of fire across the sky, enforcing justice with a brilliance that could incinerate the wicked. And perhaps most famous of all was Inanna, the queen of heaven, the goddess of war and political power, who would later be worshipped by the Babylonians as Ishtar. These were not vague spirits. They were described as flesh and blood beings with advanced technology, detailed with scientific precision by the Sumerians. So we must ask ourselves the final, chilling question. If the Sumerian texts are true, and our creators are merely travelers on a 3,600-year orbit, then they are not gone forever. They are simply circling back. And when they look down at what we have done to their garden, will they be pleased with their creation, or will they decide it is time to cleanse the earth once more?